For 1,000 years, Venice did the impossible. An entire city built on water, beating the sea every single day. But then, slowly, quietly, the sea started winning. So Italy made a bet, a €8 billion bet. And right now, it's hiding directly beneath the sea. Because you could sail straight across this lagoon over the top of one of the largest flood barriers ever built and have no idea it was there. Down on the bottom of the sea, 78 giant steel gates lying flat in the dark, full of water, and they are waiting. Waiting for the time that the sea comes for Venice. And when it is coming, these gates have 30 minutes to rise up and hold back the entire Adriatic. It's called the MOSE, and almost 20 years went into building it. One of the biggest corruption scandals in modern Italian history. It even put the mayor of Venice in handcuffs. So after all these billions, all these years, all these scandals, did it pay off? Did it actually work? And then there's this one question in Venice that nobody likes to say out loud. Even if it did, will it be enough? My name is Mattie. I'm a civil engineer and I studied at the University of Amsterdam. I've been working in the field for years and I have always had a special place in my heart for these huge, ambitious, slightly insane projects. So sit back and relax. And let me tell you the story of the project that is trying to save Venice from the sea and itself. To really understand how MOSE came to be, you first have to understand a little bit about Venice. And really, Venice's whole story can be summed up in one sentence. A 1,000-year fight with water. Because Venice isn't built next to the sea or very close to the sea. No, it's built in it. The city sits in a lagoon, and that is a shallow bay partly closed off from the sea, in this case the Adriatic, by a string of long, thin barrier islands. And there are 3 gaps in that string, 3 inlets, where the sea flows in and out with the tide. And try to remember those 3 gaps, because they might come back later. For most of Venice history, that water was a gift from God. The lagoon shielded the city from outside enemies, and the tides flushed it clean twice a day. Venice famously has no sewers, at least not in the way we think of them. The sea does the cleaning, and the whole place was in a delicate balance between land and water, and it held for over 1,000 years. But 2 things broke that balance. The first one is subsidence, and that is a very fancy engineering word for the ground is sinking. And here's the thing, Venice was always going to sink a little bit. It's built on soft lagoon mud that slowly compacts under its own weight. Naturally, that would be about 1 millimeter a year. That's the city baseline. It's been happening quietly for centuries. But in the 20th century, we put it in an overdrive. Factories on the mainland started pumping huge amount of groundwater out from under the region, and the land above dropped like a deflating cushion, sinking the city around 15 centimeters in just a few decades. And when that pumping was finally banned in 1970, the rapid sinking basically stopped. And Venice settled back down to its slow, natural creep. The second one you've already guessed, probably in your head. The rising sea. Global warming.
Climate change.
Climate change is a fact.
Climate change, warming oceans, melting ice. But in Venice, that is not something you hear on the news. It's the water coming up through your floor in your living room. And for the people who live there, that's a bit of an issue. Put those 2 problems together and you have a lovely cocktail for disaster. You get a city that floods. They even have a name for it in Italian. Acqua alta. High water. And then in one night, Venice's history changed forever. On the 4th of November in 1966, a brutal storm drove the Adriatic straight into the lagoon. The water rose to about 194 centimeters above normal height. That is the water in the streets taller than most men. Standing in St. Mark's Square, Venice was left without power, without heating, cut off from the world. Its treasures and art were soaked in salt water. And suddenly the world was realizing that one of the most beautiful cities ever built by human hands could be lost through water forever. That flood was the wake-up call. And in 1973, Italy passed a special law declaring the protection of Venice a matter of priority of national interest. In other words, the government officially said, we might have to do something about this. The problem is, and this is very Italian, and I say that with a lot of love for the Italian people, knowing you have to do something and actually doing it turned out to be about 40 years. Let me show you the thinking behind the MOSE. I think we understand the problem now, but how do we get to that sensible flood barrier? Officially, MOSE stands for Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico. I hope I said that right. In English, it's Experimental Electrical Mechanical Module. But come on, in Italian, MOSE is Moses. So, the man who parted the sea, you know exactly who that is. Whoever named this, they named it after Moses. Remember those three gaps in the lagoon? They are called Lido, Malamocco, and Chioggia. Mose's idea was to lay a row of mobile gates in each one of them. 78 mobile gates in total, split into 4 barriers, because the widest inlet, Lido, gets 2 rows. And here's the part that I love. If you've seen my videos, you know I have a soft spot for engineers who stopped fighting physics and starts using it to their advantage. And this is exactly a perfect example of that. Most of the time, you'd never know MOSE is there. The gates lie flat on the seabed, hollow steel boxes full of water, while ships sail over the top and the tourists see nothing but open sea. The lagoon breathes normally and life goes on. But then, if a dangerous tide is forecast, water sets to climb past the 110 centimeters and the system wakes up. Compressed air is pumped into those gates, forcing the water out. Full of air instead of water, each one becomes buoyant and lifts, pivoting up on its hinges until it stands at an angle above the surface. Do that across all 3 inlets, and in about 30 minutes, you've raised a wall between the lagoon and the Adriatic. The storm surges, hits it, and stops it. The city behind it stays dry, and when the danger has passed, water floods back in, the gates sink quietly to the seabed, and vanishes like nothing ever happened to it. No giant engine muscling a wall up against the weight of the ocean, just water, air, and buoyancy. And that's the genius of it. It's so simple, a child could have thought of it. Anyone who's ever pushed an empty bottle of water underneath the water or a ball in their swimming pool already gets the whole principle. And somebody did work this out actually about 2,000 years ago. We call it Archimedes' principle. The same physics that decides whether a ship floats or sinks. And if your brain just lit up a little bit, well, congratulations, you're my kind of person. For more stories about genuine, clever things that humans have built, this is a very good moment to hit that subscribe, because I would love to have you. Okay, back to Venice. So that's the theoretical aspect out of the way. Now you have to put your hard hat on, because I'm gonna show you how they build it. On top of the sea, in the most fragile, most protected, most watched environments on the planet. This is how they build it. The first stone went down in May 2003. To hold those 78 gates, they had to build vast concrete foundations, enormous hollow housing called caissons and sink them into the floor of each inlet. And these things are the sizes of apartment blocks. They had to build the housing on land, float them out, and lower them precisely out on the seabed, where they'd hold the hinges and all the machinery that pumps the air and raises those gates. Inside those structures are kilometers of tunnels, and in those tunnels are pipes and pumps, and technicians could actually walk through them under the water, under the sea, under the sea. And this is the part where I'd love to drop a little certain, crab singing a certain song. But Disney has very good lawyers and they are extremely real. So you have to do it with my my singing voice. Sorry. Because all of this, joking aside, obviously, is a genuinely serious piece of civil engineering. The kind of project that should have gone into the history books as maybe the 9th wonder of the engineering world, right next to the Delta Works back home in the Netherlands. If it gone smoothly, but alas, it did not. Okay, we're all professionals here. We're all adults. Let's talk about money, because this is where the story turns a tiny little bit dark. When Venice committed the MOSE, the budget was somewhere around 3 billion euros. Ambitious, but a number people could live with, especially because that number was going to save Venice. By the time the gates were rising, the cost roughly doubled by the 6.2 billion euros. And when you add in the years of delay and the constant maintenance this thing demands, the figure people throw around climbs higher still, towards 7, even 8 billion. And that's the 8 billion in the title. It's not one clean receipt, you see? It's what happens when a project this size goes this wrong for this long. Now, listen here. Cost overrun on big project, that's almost normal. It's a given. I could give you a dozen mega projects that came in late and over budget, but MOSE wasn't just expensive. MOSE got milked by the people who saw a way to get rich of the very thing that was supposed to protect Venice. Now here's how. For decades, the entire project was handed to a single private consortium, under a special arrangement with almost no competitive bidding. One group designing, building and maintaining the whole thing, with extraordinary control and not nearly enough oversight from the Italian government. And if you wanted to design a machine for generating corruption, the MOSE is basically what you end up with. The way it worked was grimly simple. False and inflated invoices. You bill the public for way more than it was actually costing you, you skim the difference and you funnel the money out into overseas accounts. And from there, into bribes. Money to keep the right officials happy. Money to speed up approvals. Money to make sure nobody looks too close. Honestly, at this point, it doesn't sound like a civil engineering project. It sounds more like a mob movie. Any minute now, somebody's going to make him an offer he can't refuse. Man, I'm on a roll with bad references today. Though the funny part is, this wasn't the mafia at all. No, it was politicians and businessmen. People in suits. And it was the reality, not the movies. But just like in the movies, they got caught. In 2014, the whole thing blew up. Italian investigators moved in and around 100 people came under investigations. Politicians, officials, businessmen, 35 people were arrested. And these were not small fish. No, the former president of the Veneto region, Giancarlo Galan, was accused of taking something like €1 million a year. And the sitting mayor of Venice, Giorgio Orsoni, was arrested over illegal funding of his election campaign. Around €500,000. Top executives behind the consortium faced confiscations orders running into the tens of millions of euros. The mayor of Venice, the governor of the region, all of them were arrested because of MOSE. And I want to be fair here because that matters. The corruption is not the same thing as the engineering. The gates themselves, the actual physics and the buoyancy and the steel, that work was real, and a lot of honest and brilliant people poured their hearts and soul into this project. But the scandal poisoned everything. It blew up the budget. It delayed finishing the project by years, and it meant that by the time MOSE was ready to prove itself, half of Italy already saw it as a symbol not of hope but of greed and corruption. And so it had a lot to prove. The 3rd of October, 2020. A serious tide was forecast for Venice. The kind that in a normal year would have sent not only pouring water into the St. Mark's Square, but also into the businesses and the hotels. And everybody was scrambling to lift their goods onto the shelves and bringing all their valuable stuff upstairs. But for the first time, something else was happening around Venice. The order was given to raise all 4 barriers. For real, this wasn't a drill. And across all 3 inlets, the gates rose. Outside the barrier, the sea climbed to well over a meter above the normal. And inside, in the city, St. Mark's Square, all of it stayed dry. After 1966, after nearly 50 years of arguing and digging and scandals and overspending, it worked. The machine did the one thing it was built to do. It held back the sea. And I don't want to rush that part because this is a win. It's genuinely a remarkable moment for everybody who worked on that project. For all the mess on that day, Venice was protected. The engineering delivered. But you knew there was a but coming. Working once is not the same as working forever. And this is where the story stops from being about the past and starts being about the future. Let me show you something they don't put on the postcards of Venice. This is St. Mark's Square, the literal heart of Venice. And it still floods regularly. The tourists still cross it on raised metal walkways, the same way they have been doing for decades. Now hang on, you might say, wasn't the whole point of this 8 billion euro project so this exact square would stay dry? So why is it still getting wet? Here's the catch that nobody seems to mention about this project. St. Mark's Square starts flooding when the water rises about 85 centimeters. But MOSE doesn't even wake up until around 110. And in practice, they often hold off even for higher than that, because every lift costs money and seals the lagoon. So there is a gap, a window, where the water is high enough to flood the most famous square in all of Italy, but not high enough for them to raise the barrier. And in that window, Venice just gets wet, like it always did. So it got so bad that 2 years after the first time the MOSE was used, they had to build another wall. Nothing in comparison, of course. It was a tiny little glass one right around St. Mark's Basilica to hold back the floods that sneak past the MOSE. But sit with that for a second, okay? They built the wall to protect the city from the water that beats a giant wall they built to protect the city from water. And you would think to yourself, okay, well, that's just an easy fix, right? Come on, lower the trigger. Because closing the gates more often would keep that square dry. And you think so. Except there are 3 very big problems. Problema numero uno. Money. Every single time those gates go up, it costs around 200,000 euros. In the first 4 years, MOSE was raised roughly around 100 times. That's about 20 million euros just to switch that thing on and off. On top of that 8 billion it took to build it. Problema numero 2. The port. When the gates are up, the lagoon is sealed. Nothing sails in, nothing sails out. And Venice runs one of the busiest ports in the Adriatic. Every closure, the whole thing grinds to a complete stop. Problema numero 3. And that's a big one. Remember how the lagoon stays alive? The tide? Twice a day the sea flows in and flushes the whole thing clean, the way it has been for thousands of years. Close those gates and you cut that off. Do it now and then? Fine, that's fine. The lagoon can recover from that. Do it constantly and the lagoon starts to suffocate behind its own defenses. A dead, stagnated pond where a living lagoon used to be. One of the scientists who studied this, Professor Andrea Rinaldo, a man who has literally won the top prizes in water research, ran the numbers. On the path we're currently on, he reckons that MOSE might one day need to close up 260 days a year. I want to say that one more time, okay? Because maybe you misheard me. 260 days a year. At that point, it isn't a gate that opens and shuts anymore. It's just a wall that opens occasionally. So here's the trap Venice walked into. They spent 8 billion euros, and the honest engineering answer to can we just use it more is no. We cannot. And yet the water keeps rising. So the pressure to use it more has never been stronger. There's actually a name for pouring more and more into something purely because you've already sunk a fortune into it. Economics call it sunk cost fallacy. In Venice, that sunk part is not a metaphor. And this is where Venice splits right down the middle. Ask 10 Venetians what to do, you get 11 options. Some of Italy's own most respected engineers say MOSE was the wrong bet from the start. And others, and you hear this from the people who love this city more than anything on earth, say it doesn't matter what the cost is. It's Venice, okay? We have to save it. It's a one-of-a-kind thing. And there's this idea that sounds completely unhinged until you find out serious scientists are actually proposing it. A team in Padua wants to lift the entire city. Not the buildings. No, not the buildings. The ground underneath the buildings.
We have different strata of clay and sandy soil. Sand is made of solid and water. And this water has a certain pressure. If you increase the pressure, the grain will increase in volume. And so you have a rebound.
And here's the beautiful part about that. Remember that the factories made Venice sink in the first place by sucking the water out of the ground. This is the exact same physics, just backwards, undoing the damage with the same tools that caused it. But none of them have the final answer. Every one of these answers is just a way of buying time. Which brings me to the last question. Will it be enough? And here's the uncomfortable truth about MOSE. MOSE was designed decades ago for the sea of yesterday. It was built to cope with roughly 60 centimeters of sea level rise. But the climate change projections have moved, and current estimates suggest that the sea around Venice could rise by anywhere from 60 centimeters to over a meter by the end of this century. Right at or beyond the edge of what MOSE was ever meant to handle. And the problem isn't just whether the gates are tall enough, it's how often they have to close. When MOSE was designed, the plan was it would need to rise maybe a handful of times a year, maybe 5 times. In its first 2 years of operation, it closed about 49 times. and every projection says that numbers will only go up. One of Italy's own leading hydraulic engineers, Professor Luigi Dalpaus, has called MOSE obsolete and philosophically wrong. Not because the machine doesn't work, but because the whole approach may simply be overtaken by the rising sea faster than anyone wants to admit. And that's the real quiet fear underneath this 8 billion euro story. Not that MOSE failed. It didn't. It works. The fear is that Venice spent 2 decades and a fortune building the perfect defense against the sea that's already becoming something the defense was never designed to stop. So did the 8 billion project work? Honestly, yes. And we don't know yet. Both, I guess. It saved the city. On the days it was asked to, it worked. But I keep coming back to the same thing I always do. Because the scandal and the billions and the politics, this was at the heart a group of human beings refusing to stand by and watch one of the most beautiful cities we've ever built slip quietly under the sea. They didn't want Venice to turn into an Atlantis. And for now, Venice is still here. Whether it stays here is a story none of us have the answer to. And if you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing. And maybe you like this video too. And let's keep telling each other the stories of the people who refuse to settle, who swim against the current, against all odds. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.